Good evening, friends. My name is Seth Oster Rosen. I'm a PhD student in the philosophy of religions here at the University of Chicago Divinity School. And on behalf of the U Chicago Buddhist Association and the Buddhist Studies Club, I would like to welcome you to the second of Khenpo Tsodargye Rinpoche's talks at the University of Chicago. Rinpoche's talk on Monday was focused on the life and work of his teacher, the renowned 20th century Tibetan Buddhist scholar and master, Khenpo Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche. Tonight's talk here in Bon Chapel will be more focused on teaching a contemporary Buddhist view of the world and is titled, A Way to Think in Turbulent Times. But first, to give you a more proper introduction to Khenpo Tsodargye Rinpoche and his own work, allow me to introduce Professor Christian Wedemeyer, Associate Professor of the History of Religions at the Divinity School, Associate Faculty in South Asian Languages and Civilizations, and also in the college.
Thank you, Seth. I don't know that my introduction will be more proper, but I am very grateful to be given the opportunity to extend welcome to Khenpo Tsodargye Rinpoche. And so it's, again, to get to the point, my delight to welcome Khenpo Tsodargye Rinpoche for the second time this week. The way the talks were structured, the first talk was more in academic mode, a historical mode, and today we've asked him to let loose a little bit more, be freer a little bit more in the context of Bon Chapel and to give a teaching. And this is another connection, actually, to the history I just recited. There's a number of connections that one might pull out of Khenpo Tsodargye's work and his connection to the Buddhist traditions in Chicago. Like Paul Karras and Suzuki, in his career, he's shown a very long-standing and deep commitment to exploring the vitality of the Buddhist teachings and the Buddhist traditions in the contemporary world, adapting as they have. There's the tradition that Buddha taught 84,000 different teachings because he ran into 84,000 different people, and they each needed something particular. And so as people change, as times change, Buddhism has to change, and new teachings are adapted and reinterpreted over time. This is well part of the established order of things in interpreting Buddhism within the traditions. And so science and the regimes of modernity have been one of the largest challenges for all the religious traditions, and Rinpoche has been very active in thinking through some of these issues with relating to the constructive study of the Buddhist traditions. He also is an accomplished translator, something also that we're proud of doing here at Chicago. And Matthew Kapstein, whom I mentioned before, one of our faculty in History of Religions and Philosophy of Religions, had translated into English some decades ago the monumental work on the history and doctrines of the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism from Tibetan into English by Dujong Rinpoche, the then head of the Nyingma school. And Khenpo Tsodargye has translated that into a contemporary Chinese idiom. No small task. This is a volume like this. And it was the second translation. The first translation was into a more stilted classical Chinese, very difficult for people to access. And so Rinpoche took it upon himself, which I think is representative of his larger career, to reach out into a more vernacular, accessible idiom to make the Buddhist teachings and the history of them, their transmission, accessible to the broadest possible audience. And so he's been very active in his career, both in translating Tibetan works, the classical works of Buddhist philosophy and thought, the so-called 5 texts, into Chinese, accessible Chinese translations, and also to enrich the Tibetan traditions by bringing the classics of Chinese Buddhism, otherwise untranslated and unavailable to the Tibetan traditions, into a Tibetan form, so that the Tibetan Buddhists can be enriched in exchange intellectually, spiritually with the Chinese traditions and their living representatives. He's a humanitarian. Again, I could go on all night and not leave time for Rinpoche to talk if I were to catalog all the marvelous things he's done, building hospitals, schools, reaching out to the needy, as well as being a tireless teacher and advocate for the Buddhist traditions. And it is rarer to find a fully qualified Kembo. To be a Kembo signifies that Rinpoche has gone through at least 12 years of intensive study, memorization, debate, and practice of the classical texts of the Buddhist tradition. And so he brings all of this wisdom to his teaching and to his practice and his humanitarian efforts, his translations. So please join me in welcoming Kembo Sotoki.